For centuries, the Maya civilization thrived in the rainforests of Mesoamerica. They built massive stone cities, developed one of the most complex writing systems in the ancient world, tracked astronomical cycles with remarkable precision, and ruled through powerful dynasties whose names were carved into stone. Yet by the end of the first millennium, many of these great cities were abandoned. This phenomenon is often described as the collapse of the Maya civilization. But historians now agree that this phrase hides a far more complex reality. To understand what happened, we must first understand what the Maya world actually was. The Maya were not a single empire ruled from one capital. They were a network of independent city-states, each with its own rulers, alliances, and rivalries. Cities like Tikal, Copan, Palenque, and Calakmul were political centers surrounded by farming communities that supported large populations. Power was deeply tied to kingship, ritual, and the ability to manage resources. This system worked until pressure began to build. One of the most important factors historians study today is environmental stress. Climate research based on lake sediments, cave formations, and pollen data shows periods of prolonged drought between the 8th and 10th centuries. Rainfall became less predictable. Crop yields declined. Food shortages increased. For societies dependent on intensive agriculture, even small shifts in climate had serious consequences. At the same time, population levels in many Maya regions were high. Cities had grown dense. Forests had been cleared for farmland and construction. Water management systems were stretched to their limits. This made the system increasingly fragile. When drought struck, there was little margin for error. Political instability added another layer of stress. Maya inscriptions show an increase in warfare during the late Classic period. Rival city-states fought over territory, trade routes, and prestige. Captured rulers were displayed in carvings, signaling violent competition rather than stability. War disrupted agriculture, displaced populations, and weakened political legitimacy. Importantly, Maya rulers were not just political leaders. They were seen as intermediaries between humans and the gods. When crops failed and droughts persisted, rulers lost credibility. Rituals that once reinforced authority now highlighted failure. As faith in leadership eroded, loyalty fractured. Archaeology reveals a pattern that challenges the idea of a sudden collapse. Cities were not destroyed all at once. Instead, monumental construction slowed. Inscriptions stopped being carved. Elite centers were gradually abandoned. Some regions declined earlier than others. This tells us the process unfolded over generations, not overnight. Trade networks also weakened. Long-distance exchange of goods like obsidian, jade, and luxury items declined. As political centers lost power, economic connections fragmented. Without centralized coordination, regional systems became isolated. It is also crucial to note what did not happen. The Maya people did not disappear. Millions of Maya descendants still live in the region today. Languages, traditions, and cultural practices survived, adapted to new circumstances. What collapsed was not a civilization, but a specific political and social system. By the post-classic period, Maya society looked different. Power was less centralized. Cities were smaller. Political structures shifted. This was not an end, but a transformation shaped by environmental limits and human choices. So why does the collapse of the Maya civilization still fascinate historians? Because it shows how advanced societies can be undermined by a combination of climate stress, population pressure, political conflict, and fragile systems of authority. No single cause explains the decline. Instead, it was the interaction of multiple forces, slowly pushing a complex system beyond its limits. The Maya story is not a warning of inevitable collapse. It is a reminder that civilizations are dynamic. They change, they adapt, and sometimes they reorganize in ways that history books simplify far too much. That is what historians continue to study. Not a mystery without answers, but a process whose lessons still matter.